Welcome to the 2024 Interfaith Action Faith and Pride program. Each year, Interfaith Action hosts a conversation around current realities of facing the LGBTQ community and its intersection with faith communities. My name is Sid Moen. I am serving as the host for this year's discussion. This past year has been somewhat of a troubling one for LGBT communities around the United States. More than 500 anti-LGBTQ bills have been introduced at local levels, state houses, and within the federal government. Some religious communities have advocated for that anti-LGBTQ legislation, and others have vehemently organized to oppose such legislation. We've seen campaigns in school districts, in local municipalities, within state government, as well as on a national level, seeking to roll back LGBTQ protections as well as inclusion. Amidst this context, we're honored to have today's program focus on a conversation with elected officials and candidates for elected office here in Southwest Michigan. We have 4 individuals joining us in this discussion. One of the individuals had an emergency come up, and that was Mayor Brook Thomas of the city of St. Joseph. Had an emergency that called her away about 5 minutes before the start of the program. Let me introduce the individuals who have generously offered their time for this year's discussion. Dave Bunte is the supervisor of Chikaming Township here in Southwest Michigan. We also have John Bonkoske, who is a member of the city of Bridgman's council. We have 2 candidates for elected office, Janet Henderson, who is a candidate for the Berrien County Board of Commissioners. And we also have Jessica Jackson, who is a candidate for Berrien County Clerk. Let's begin the discussion, and I think we'll start with Dave Bunte. Dave, I believe, is the longest serving openly gay individual who holds elected office here in Southwest Michigan. So, Dave, what motivated you to seek elected office in rural Michigan, an area of the state not necessarily known for progressive inclusion?
Good morning, and thank you, Sid, for the invitation. It's nice to be here. The motivation was a group of local residents who approached me. I had no intention originally of getting into local office, but at the moment in time that they did approach me, I seriously considered a change in not only careers, but an opportunity as you get into the later stages of your professional life to be able to do some give back or give some time and effort to try to improve our local community. That was the motivation more than anything. It's like it was time for me to step back out of my professional career and move into a different professional career that I think I could offer a lot of the talents or education that I received in the corporate sector to assist in moving our community in Southwest Michigan forward.
No, great. Well, we're delighted with your leadership. John, let's move to you as kind of our second elected openly gay official here in Southwest Michigan. What motivated you?
So, it's interesting, not unlike David, I come from the corporate world and spent a lot of time there and a lot of traveling around and a lot of focus in raising our children with my husband for many, many years. And I wanted to give back to the community in a way that actually offered up my time. It's easy to write a check, it's easy to do other things, but to actually delve in and give back to your community, that was important to me. But specifically, I wanted to make an impact. And doing that, in doing that, I kind of thought about, well, how can I best do that? And I looked into local government. I looked into how maybe I can better my community, how I can offer a voice that may be a little bit different than what is normally seen here, and take my background in education and experience and apply it to both better the community and frankly, better the county as well. I found that it worked. I found that all of a sudden, coming from a healthcare background, all of a sudden I could apply a lot of different things to municipalities and counties, and economic development started to come into focus, housing, education, other elements that I found that I really had an interest in bettering. So it was the time in my life as well where I wanted to give back very specifically.
Great. So some parallels today.
Very much, yeah, very much.
Great. Well, let's move on then to Jessica and Janet. Janet, what has motivated you to run for the Berrien County Board of Commissioners?
Well, I think I'm going to be borrowing a bit of a page from both John and David. I was not, I didn't come into this seeking to become involved in politics. Having retired from a big law firm in Chicago in 2011 and having spent the last 4 years functionally here full time and having spent a lot of time here since 2004, I became involved in a local charity called Neighbor by Neighbor. And also my partner and I started volunteering with Feeding America. And through that lens, we were able to see a lot that transplanted Chicagoans never see. And that is that there is a great deal of poverty in this area that is essentially invisible to most people. And that has become something of a passion. And through my work with Neighbor by Neighbor in particular, I was able to reconnect with my old friend and partner, Gene Schoon, who just asked me. And I gave it some thought, asked me to run for office, and I gave it some thought. And, as much as David said, it struck me that this was a good time in life. The three of us are older than Jessica and have the time to reflect on what a second act might look like and how best we can deploy the skills that made our first act successful in a way that serves the public and improves our community. And that, the more I thought about it, the more compelling that was, and that's why I decided to run. And hopefully, as a lawyer, I can redeem myself with the public.
Great. Well, and you've also provided an introduction to Jessica, who is balancing life as a professional, a wife, and a mother. So, Jessica, amidst your busy schedule, what motivated you to seek elected office?
Well, in February, Indiana passed SB 480, which is a ban on gender-affirming care for any state resident under the age of 18. I know the impact that this ban on gender-affirming care has on transgender adults and teenagers, because like you said, I am a professional, I'm a mental health therapist, and this is the specific population that I work with. So when this happened, I knew that it would cause huge changes in the community, especially with transgender families, kiddos and adults, and I wanted to do something more. As a therapist, I hear the stories and I want to install hope, but there's really only so much you can do when these kiddos and their families are being used as political pawns, right? So I knew that if someone like me didn't step up and do something and advocate for them, then things would never change. So that is what inspired me, is the fight for equality for transgender kiddos and their families and adults as well.
And I should mention that Jessica lives in kind of a border community. Her residence is in Buchanan, which is right next door to Indiana. So how did or does your sexual orientation or gender identity influence your perspective on social policy, or perhaps it doesn't influence it. Anyone, jump in.
Well, in all honesty, I'll jump in. It had really little impact or little to do with both my decision making and getting into politics. I've been an out, proud, married partner and I have been together for 37 years. Part of society and the community. But when it came to local policy, it's our opportunity here locally to make some decisions that improve the quality of life for all of our residents, no matter what socioeconomic background you come from or where you live or what your history is. So we pride ourselves, I think, down here in Chikaming specifically on equality and full transparency and open-based hiring policies. And I believe we have one of the most or the most diverse police forces in Berrien County for the scale or size that we have. So I'm really proud of that as well. But as far as policy goes, we're trying to make our lives better here in Chikaming and all the residents. So it's equality based is across the board, no matter what. If it's not just based on sexuality, it has to do with your background, your history, your financial status, your housing, everything. And to make sure everybody's treated with respect and everyone has a voice that is not tampered. That's the most important part of our policy making.
So that kind of motivating drive for equality for all individuals.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. How about the rest of you? As sexual orientation, gender identity. John, please.
I'll jump in. Just it didn't necessarily occur to me that about social policy or taking or having some sort of agenda. I more thought about this as where I come from or how I'm made ought to be shown, and you show by doing in many different ways. So these kinds of social policy issues kind of come up in discussion. In a place like Bridgman, it is pretty much a white kind of place, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's people kind of see the world very, very similarly. And coming in sometimes and starting to have a discussion with people about your thoughts, your backgrounds, does send an influencing message. For example, and I'll give you a very personal one, not as much during my campaign, but early on when I was running for office, but as people got to know me, I was the first gay person they'd ever met. That was literally, we are in a world here where that doesn't happen. And people have questions that once you have some trust and you've kind of got to know folks, they're dying to ask. And I found that compelling and interesting, that how do you change people's thought processes? How do you change policies slow but surely? Well, the answer is one at a time. It's literally a one at a time kind of conversation. And I found, though not desirous of this, that all of a sudden I was becoming an advocate, not only for the LGBTQ community, but for discrimination on any front. Those mindsets that people had that they had never really more deeply kind of considered. And that, I think, is one of the things that sitting in a public office, you can make a difference by showing and by doing. And I'm seeing that slow but surely here.
Great.
Yeah,
I was just going to, say to Jessica and Janet that global studies of social policy development have indicated the more women are involved in elected or appointed positions, the more progressive social policy is. Shame on us as men, but so as open lesbians, how does your role as women and as lesbians influence your work around social policy?
I'll tackle that in this way. First, I want to emphasize that I think that what both David and John have said again rings very true for me. To my mind, being a county commissioner when I go knock on doors, I don't think they're going to care if I'm gay or straight. I think what they're going to care about is what I can do to help improve their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore that's what I'm focused on. I think the most important way to change people, there's an old saying, and I cannot recall who said it. I don't know if it was like a Marshall McLuhan or someone like that, showing my age, but it's the personal is political, and it
Mm-hmm.
is.
Yeah.
And so when you are who you are openly, and people see you demystify all of the preconceptions that they have, they are forced to reckon with the idea, with the fact, and standing in front of them, that the person who they're laughing with, that they're talking with, who's showing empathy and compassion, happens to be gay. And they have been taught all their lives that that is morally abhorrent. And now they have to square that circle, and they can't do it. And that's the way you change people. And that's the way you change them on a personal level. And ultimately, that's how you change them on a policy level in terms of what they are in favor of or against, because they start to see it in ways that they can relate to. And I frankly think that's the only way change happens. Ultimately, I used to have a philosophical argument with one of my partners about incremental change versus revolutionary change. Revolutionary change doesn't always stick because you haven't changed hearts and minds before you change policy. And so it sometimes, not always, but sometimes. So to my mind, it's really, really important to make the personal connection with people. Show them who you are. The Human Rights Campaign in the 90s famously called it the water cooler conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you come out at work. You know, you don't do it with a billboard. You just let people know who you are. And it works. And it works every time. Not every time. Sometimes you come from a deeply religious Catholic place like I do, it gets real hard. But over time, it tends to happen. So that would be the first thing I'd say. The second thing I would say is simply about the way women and men sometimes approach problems, probably largely due to our socialization. I think that it's no accident, and I think it's probably still true today, that if you went to any major law firm in Chicago, women would be doing some of the things I was asked to do, 30 years ago, which is be the liaison between partners and associates, be on the committees that deal with creating an environment that makes what we do less unpleasant on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm.
Women seem to be innately better at, I shouldn't say better, maybe it just comes more naturally for what probably having, again, largely to do with socialization, to approaching things from an empathic point of view and feeling less the need to be confrontational in all situations. And so to my mind, that just it makes it easier to work with people if they don't come at you sort of defensive right off of the bat. And I think women may have a bit of an advantage in doing that.
Okay. Jessica?
So I agree with everything that everyone has said 100%. It's not like I go canvassing and I'm like, hey, I'm a lesbian, right? That's not the first thing we talk about.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about, why I'm running, what I plan to change. And that may come up in conversation. That's just one part of who I am. However, I think it is important to be out and proud, to not hide that from people, because especially now, there's so much hateful rhetoric around sexual orientation and gender identity that we should talk about these things, when it comes up. I think about Elliot Page. I'm also going to use a quote, Janet, sorry. Elliot Page talked about on a documentary that they made a long time ago about being queer. They would go to different countries and talk to people about being queer. Well, they described, being queer and as a state of evolution. As you come out of the closet, you evolve. But so do the people that love you and know you. So do the people in your community. Of course, people might be afraid, but once they know you and they're able to understand, hey, Jessica's not that monster I've read about on Fox News or, heard about, whatever. She's a real person. She's a mother. She's a human being, and she does care. It does start to change them. And that is how we make change in our community. So.
Right. Well, let me add a footnote to that, fully affirming the value of personal connection. I recall when I was seeking ordination almost 50 years ago, And the Illinois Conference Supervisor, who oversaw all United Churches of Christ in Illinois, was meeting with me and with a ministerial approval committee, and they indicated that you should spend the next year or two getting to know individuals on a personal level. And the conference minister, African-American, said to the committee, I would welcome the day when faith communities understand their faith call to advance justice, and that would prevail and not require the personal contact, and that the drive for justice rooted in faith beliefs would be a motivating factor. So I hope as religious communities engage in this podcast, they will also recognize faith tenets that say we must be about justice making. Well, let's move on. There have been increasing threats to LGBT inclusion. There's been kind of a dial up of anti-gay rhetoric and hate speech. Have you experienced any of that in your leadership? Or how do you respond to individuals who negate the legal or moral inclusion of LGBTQ individuals?
I'll let somebody else go first for a change, you like.
Yeah, I'll speak up briefly and just say I have seen it. You see it nationally and worldwide. The media focuses in on this from time to time. Here in Berrien County, there are small groups who like to show up and to harass at certain outings or events. And I'll give you a great example of something that happened just recently. There was a gathering in Dowagiac this past weekend. I did not go, but my husband, who runs the Out Center as the executive, he has one of the executive leaders there on the board chair. There was a person standing there and spouting Bible verses and being sort of not belligerent, but sort of making a stink in front of people that were entering into this park area. And one of the ladies that were part of this LGBTQ community there went and offered him a cookie and then offered him another cookie. And all of a sudden, he mellowed just enough and he sort of slinked away and left. And kind of staying with this theme of how do you change people and how do you do it, all of a sudden there's this demystification, right, that happens as a result. There's this facade that happens of anger and of hate and of groupthink that I think occurs. And all of a sudden you demystify that and you're a human being standing in front of you. And there is a human being standing in front of you that isn't so terribly different than you once thought, at least from a human point of view. And it changes people again. So that's a very small kind of thing. The last thing I think we want to be is terribly confrontational to these kinds of things. It only builds and all. But I think small disarmings along the way, especially in our area, can be very beneficial. So that's my thinking on the subject. Disarm when possible.
Yeah, I would add
diplomacy. Huh?
Yeah, diplomacy where possible.
I think that's an excellent point. I come back to the water cooler conversation in that sense, and to build on John's example. I have heard many times in my life about this as a lifestyle from the religious, very, very fundamentalist religious community, that somehow who we are is a lifestyle, therefore it's a choice, therefore it can be a sin, right? And I think that the minute that you can help someone realize that it's no more a choice than your ethnicity, and then then they have to face the notion that this is who we are. that we are the same God's creature that they are. And when that starts to manifest, then you can see change. And it takes time. It's oftentimes just not a conversation. And again, I go back to my background. And it's taken longer with some members of my family than others. But I think that the only way you affect change is not by preaching to people, because then you're just giving them back with what they're unloading with, and it's just not going to get us anywhere. I think what we have to do is lead by example and help them understand the people who are very unfairly biased, help them understand sort of the flaws in the logic, if you will. And that's the best, I think that's the best thing we can do. And I think it works, by the way.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Janet. And locally, this region, as in many parts of Michigan, have been known to be extremely strong in their religious teachings. It's an extremely strong base I have not witnessed, but on a couple of minor occasions since I got into office, any issues related to my sexuality and religion and how they don't seem to match. I was open arms with the staff that I have here. All my friends locally are extremely faith-based, but they see us again as individuals, and they get to learn and grow with you, and you can show by action that you're just like they are. And right. We've been fortunate not to really have any issues that are confrontational when it comes to who we are as human beings, and there was no weaponization of faith against me specifically. And I feel the same, because there are a very large LGBTQ community here in Southwest Michigan. They're not necessarily the bar hopping, flag waving group that we all remember if we're from a larger urban area, but they're definitely here and supportive, and a lot of transplanted, but also extremely engaged in the community and supporting nonprofits, supporting all different types, ages, backgrounds of people. So I think that, what Janet said and what John said too about, easing into, getting to know you, you really do have to, you can turn a lot of heads and change a lot of people's minds if you just give them the opportunity, and they in turn give you the opportunity to engage and find out exactly that we're just all human beings. We're all here for the same reason.
Jessica, could you perhaps give a unique slant, given your mental health work, particularly with young folks who have been subject, at least through the media, to kind of school board, library protests, kind of a resurgence of anti-LGBTQ rhetoric. What approach do you take with them?
Well, I always think, and I share this with them too, what's behind the behavior? What's the motivator here when we have these, this hateful rhetoric and these anti-LGBTQ protests? And of course it is fear, right? So if we can educate people, if we can meet them where they are, that's always a wonderful thing. However, you can only do that to a certain point, and I never encourage anyone at all to go tick for tack and be violent or, be just as hateful. However, we do have to take a stand and sometimes, wave that flag, go to protest, make sure that these voices are being heard. So I just encourage them to keep showing up as they do. If they decided to not go to a school board meeting and not talk about how these book bans are impacting their education at the classroom level, then certainly things would never change. So I encourage them, be peaceful, be educated, know what you're talking about, be able to answer questions, and share your personal narratives on these platforms when you can. And they do that through social media, TikTok and stuff. So that's just how I go about it.
Okay.
So I wonder if I could just add, I'm so sorry, just
sure,
quickly, it's so germane to all of this, sort of what all of our participants have spoken about, but Jessica hit on something: fear. I think that so much of this is fear-based versus something else. They're afraid of something. People are just generally afraid of things they don't know and they don't understand. And I think disarming that in any way continues with this theme. I wanted to add one other thought. Like David, I have never in my entire time, and I've been here 25 years, in and out, and much more permanently in the last 6 or 8, experienced any direct discrimination or hate directed at me. I'm here to do a job and to better my community. And at least overtly, I have never experienced anything directly. There is a very large community here, indeed, and it is strong, and it is proud in the best possible definition of pride in making communities better here.
Well, let's move on then. How has your faith background been of either a negative or a positive influence in you being an openly gay or lesbian person, or perhaps faith background is irrelevant in your experience?
Well, I can.
Go ahead, Janet, please.
I was just going to say I have a very complicated relationship with the religion that I grew up with as a Roman Catholic. On the one hand, they remain a very difficult nut to crack on this topic. On the other hand, having gone to 12 years of Catholic education, I can tell you that the emphasis on, in a post-Vatican II world, when I went through high school, the emphasis on good work, social justice, and manifesting your faith in good works, sort of the classic notion of that. For example, in high school, we were required to be involved in a program called Christian Service. And we had to go out in the community and engage with people we would otherwise never have seen. And it became it was a very, very influential part of my life, because it was my first interaction with poverty. It was my first interaction with having to address it in some small way and understand it. And I would not have seen that. I grew up in a middle-class family. I would never have seen it. And so I think the emphasis and the challenge that we were given as high school students in a Catholic high school in Oklahoma to be good neighbors and to be ambassadors for putting faith in action was a really, really positive thing. And I also think that it was a very challenging form of education. You were taught to question, ironically, in many ways. So looking back on some of the orthodoxy, one small, perhaps not very funny example is they did such a good job of it that when I was the editorial editor of my high school paper, I decided to lead, and this is in 1973, I decided to lead a symposium among the student body on the question of abortion. I was told that there were 2 sides to every issue except that one. So they put the kibosh on it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But so it's not a purely linear story of progress. But I do think that emphasis on Christian service was enormously important.
Yeah. Okay. But Dave, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, and I think we all have come from probably very unique or complicated backgrounds when it comes to our religions and faiths and how we grew up and how we ended up eventually coming out or coming to terms. I have an extremely religious Lutheran family. I went through 12 years as well of parochial schools, as Janet did. And it took me a while to come to terms with who I was and my sexuality, but also balance that with religion. And to date, I still have a very religious family. I myself, personally, am not religious in the text that I go to church every Sunday. My faith is based similarly on Janet's experiences and what I think religion should teach, and that is inclusion and justice and all the equality issues that seem to get lost now in today's mainstream media when it comes to religion. and all the discussions and all the negativity that are out there. I'm hoping that in time that turns around, but I think that's a real challenge for us right now as a country, is dealing with that that loss of what religion is supposed to teach and what it's supposed to support in each of our own lives. That's my personal opinion. And I go for the same qualities and look to the same reasons that Janet spoke of when it comes to my own personal life and how I reflect on and work for our community.
Well, thank you. That's a good promo for the work of Interfaith Action in Southwest Michigan.
You're welcome.
John.
So, you're going to hear sort of a rerun here, but with a couple slight, whatever. Lutheran boy here, lots and lots of years of school. And if you want to ever, pick somebody for Bible trivia, I'm your guy. Probably just having been raised through that whole Lutheran system the whole time, you struggle with it. And that there are two Lutherans out there, and I was the conservative one that I was raised in, and my parents remain very, very religious and struggle with this, not in a struggle with me or my husband John in any way, but their faith and science, because they're people of science as well, constantly struggle with each other. Mm-hmm. So, if you're your own special self in a more closed, environment like that, I think it's a much harder deal to sort of break out and be your own special self. But my parents were very loving. They understood, or maybe not understood, but loved me. With the love the sinner, hate the sin kind of, concept. But just like Janet and David, I struggle with faith in the sense that, it's the old joke, right? Jesus, save me from your followers, right? And so much of that is it. If you look at the concept behind it, and it doesn't matter what faith it is, in the Jewish faith, it's do good, doing good. The idea is that you do good in the world. Right? Here we sit in our Christian traditions, and you look back, and it is about doing good works as well. And grace alone and all of those kinds of things. I don't want that lost. What I saw when I came out was a much more us and them kind of faith issues. There was the UCC group, Sid, right? That was inclusive very, very early on. And, if you remained faith thoughtful in some way, these were the churches that you might have gone to, and they were somewhat isolated from the larger group. I would say as time has gone on, I have seen a greater and greater inclusion, except for some of the very, what I call past the top 10, big boy religions, Christian religions specifically, where there is some element of inclusion and at least an attempt to understand. They're losing followers. They're losing people as a result in the world of organized religion. And I think that a way back is to say, how do we be inclusive as opposed to exclusive? Exclusivity should never be falling into religion on a general basis. Figure out how we can love each other from a faith-based sort of way. So long way around the barn, but utterly agree with Janet and David.
Okay. And Jessica, I believe you are involved in a local congregation.
Yes, I go to, it's in Indiana, but United Church of Christ in South Bend, Indiana. So, and that's actually how I met Sid and David, actually, and Janet. It kind of all went all that way, through this network of people. But it did start with Pastor Scott of that church. So, my answer is both ways, honestly, both in a negative way. It was impacted and later on in a positive way. So, we grew up not really religious, not really going to church a lot like David, here and there. Yet when I came out, my dad wanted to use the Bible against me as a weapon and tell me how it was wrong. And, of course, my family got through that and became very accepting. The real pain came when I met my wife. Of course, we got to know each other. We got engaged. Her family is Baptist. They're very religious. They weren't accepting, they're love the sinner, not the sin. But on our wedding day specifically, they did not come to our wedding. And I saw the pain in her eyes. I saw the disappointment and how that has still impacted our family. Now we have 2 children. It's a really difficult landscape to navigate still. To be in that situation. We're doing it. People are changing, but still painful nonetheless. The positive aspect is Pastor Scott Bowie. I started to go to church there after we were looking for a venue for our very wedding. And one of the people that go there that was running the booth at the time, she said, hey, you could come to our church and get married there, and our pastor will marry you. And to me, that was like, I was blown away. A pastor will marry us? We're gay. And of course, she said yes. So we did all of that. And I've seen Pastor Scott stand up there and share all the things that you guys are talking about, being inclusive and social justice and being loving. And there's very rare occasions where I haven't cried, because during his sermons where he's touched my heart and made me want to go out there and do more in the name of faith, right? So in both ways, negative, and now my heart's began to change with my church and my pastor and all of the congregation. They have been so loving and really shown me what true Christians are, and a love of Christ. So yeah.
Well, as we come to a close of this discussion, one of the areas of focus for Interfaith Action this year is to look at the impact of religious nationalism globally and Christian nationalism specifically here within the United States. In contrast to our commitment at Interfaith Action to promote pluralistic democracy, justice, equality, inclusion. What do each of you see as primary threats to our system of pluralistic democracy?
I see the isolationism that they're proclaiming at this point. I think there's a strong push for an evangelical, white, faith-based. That's what the moniker they put themselves under as controlling politics in this country, and that has never been the basis since inception. We were supposed to be an all-inclusive, all-welcoming, all religions across the board. I have 100% respect for every individual's own faith and any religious group or institution, but the overt political aspects of this that have come in the past year or two specifically is extremely alarming. I think they're using it, again, they're weaponizing religion and a sort of specific group to create a singular society as opposed to an all-inclusive society. And that's what I fear most, and what I hope can change with the change in rhetoric and open discussion. And I'm still hopeful, because I've seen a lot of the school board issues and things that have come up across the country that I could not believe about 2 years ago been defeated. A majority now have been defeated, in that they've gone back to what to me is sane political activism as to right and wrong. And I still have a lot of faith that will continue. But that's what I fear. I fear it's whenever weaponization of religion and the use of one specific ideology is trying to take over our politics and the way our country's run.
Yeah.
I would go ahead.
No, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
I think that I guess the word that comes to mind for me is I think there is just becoming a more and more entrenched siloism. That's a word. I may have just invented a word. That is sort of taking over, frankly, the extremes on every end of the spectrum. It is most manifest. It's manifest in its most dangerous form, I think, with what David is talking about. But I think it is a natural byproduct of only tuning into your tribe, whatever you define your tribe to be, and not listening to anyone outside your tribe. I think it will inevitably lead to a closing of your mind, an inability to appreciate or even want to hear people with an opposing point of view And I think it's just taken over. I mean, I don't know how one unrings that bell, but it's got to be unrung. And I will put a plug in for something that I meant to mention earlier. There was a documentary done in the 90s. It wasn't distributed very widely, but it's still available. And for people of faith who want to have a message to provide that might have a chance of sinking in, I highly recommend it. It's called For the Bible Tells Me So.
Mhm.
And it is about how people of different faiths, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, who tend to have, in some cases, a very fundamentalist point of view, um, are grappling with the fact that their children are gay. And it's a gripping documentary, and it's about how they interpret their faith, and it's a teachable moment. And so I highly recommend. We've given it to people. I think it's had an impact, and I highly recommend. If I can plug it, that if anybody's listening to this and they want to at least take a gander at changing someone's mind, they could give them this documentary. It might help.
Yeah, it's very good. Actually, I'm aware of that. I remember that. Haven't seen it in years. That's a great thought. To the topic, just a little bit. Populism is the one large thing that our forefathers and our framers of our Constitution were worried about, and they tried everything to not allow this to happen. And yet, throughout history, populism has occurred. And I think we're sitting in and among that now in this siloistic sort of way, where nobody's talking to each other. And I've seen this on an extreme right side. I've seen this on an extreme left, where everyone is feeling the same, element. Where really most of us sit in the middle somewhere, where I think we could have some normal and important discourse. But the second you say no, or talk to the hand, or be quiet, or I'm not going to listen, they're absolutely out of their bat. And maybe on those extremes of the bell curve people are, things get lost very, very quickly. And I would say the most is misunderstanding. I think the most is just a misunderstanding of who we are and all. But we are under threat. I think there is a fear of the evangelical Christians of our nation that are watching faith as they interpret it slipping through their fingers, books that they can't fathom, education that they can't fathom, and all, and they're not seeking first to understand. And I really think that we are advocates, and we need to be ambassadors to talk to somebody that sees the world differently than you. Do it. Sit down. It may not be comfortable, but it is important. And I think all of us can learn from that and spread the word from a religious point of view. No better place than sitting in a house of God to kind of try, be open about that.
Jessica, any final comments?
Yes, actually, two things I think. So one would be, education and understanding. Back in April, I went to a Royal Caucus conference in Manistee. We were privileged enough to have Doug Paget there. He is part of Vote for Common Good, and he was able to teach us about Christian nationalism and the threat of its rise. We all left, everybody left that presentation shocked. We didn't even know what was going on, but he also helped to give us some hope. So education, understanding that this is what's happening, but also hope. And I'm gonna, piggyback off of everything that everybody has said here. Very often, even, people on both sides, demonize each other. And I think that right now is a great time for us to stop doing that. Republicans are our friends. Democrats are our community. They work at the gas station. They're cashiers. They're nurses. I mean, can we stop doing that? Can we stop being a two-party system? I know that might be controversial, but I think we're more than that. We're human beings. We're connected by love and community and our family, right? And why can't we just get back to that? So education, understanding that this is actually happening, but getting back to our roots of human beings and just being done with this nonsense. Go across the aisle and talk to that person. Have a conversation. Have coffee. a month ago, I had a wonderful lunch, my children and I, with a Republican. Oh, shocker. She was amazing. She was wonderful. Some people would not do that. Of course, I love people. I want to hear their story. I want to make connections. If I hadn't met her, I wouldn't have heard her beautiful story about her life. She wouldn't have been able to color a picture with my daughter, who loves her, by the way. Met her one time and just loves her, keeps talking about her. Republican, who cares? That's just one part of who she is. She's a great person. And there's great people on both sides and in the middle and all over. So I know that was a lot, but that's just how I feel right now.
Great. Well, I want to thank you for your generous contribution of time for this annual Faith and Pride discussion. We hope that for our faith communities, this will both inform and inspire them to work for inclusion and inclusion of all people. Let me close with a signpost that I saw on a Mennonite church here in the region. And the signpost indicated, "We believe in the separation of church and hate." So understanding church as being synagogue or mosque or church, we are committed to the separation of God's houses and hate. With that hope for the year ahead, we thank you all for the ongoing work of justice and inclusion. Happy Pride to everyone. Thanks again.